Good morning, everyone. I am just going to add Lisa really quick so that our lawyer can join us. So if you don't mind waiting 1 second. Okay, Lisa, are you there?
Hi. Hi, Monica.
It's nice
Can
to
you hear
see
me?
you. Yeah. Okay, so we're live now. Let's see. I'm not sure if people have joined yet.
People are joining. I can see
Oh, you
them.
can.
So,
Okay.
everyone, thank you for joining us today. We are here today to discuss managing co-parenting with a narcissist. And I'm happy to be here with you, Monica. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's nice to see you, Lisa. I'm really glad that you could do this live with me. My name is Monica Borschel. I am a clinical psychologist in Hong Kong, but I relocated to California where I'm working as a divorce and trauma recovery coach. So I help people with strategies with their children, with their ex, communication wise, kind of getting through that court process with a difficult person. Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa DeMonte Cervoni. I am a family law attorney in the state of Illinois, mostly Cook County. I do some of the collar counties. I've been practicing exclusively family law for about 13 years. That includes divorce and paternity cases, child support, parenting issues, custody, and I work with parties in a wide variety of family law matters, which includes litigation and alternative dispute resolution.
Okay, great.
All right. So we're going to get started with some Q&A. If our viewers here have some questions or comments, feel free to chat those to us. If we see them and can discuss, we will absolutely discuss them. If we don't have time to get to them today, we will reach out to you separately to answer your questions, and you can also feel free to contact us directly with further questions in the future. All right, so Monica, you are the clinical psychologist. So I'm going to start with the basic question for you. What's a narcissist?
So it's a very complex answer, right? Because we have the popular view of someone who's selfish, entitled, causes a lot of chaos. From a clinical perspective, it's under the cluster B personality disorders. Erratic, um, they tend to blame others, they lack empathy, they can be unpredictable, they can be very dramatic. That being said, just because your ex is difficult doesn't make them a narcissist, right? And so you need to check what's their empathy level and how much are they blaming me? Can they take responsibility for anything? Is it always someone else's problem? Are they always projecting their own inadequacy, feelings of inadequacy, I should say, onto others? So, for example, you might notice they have a pattern of if they feel rejected or inadequate, they will rage, or they will get revenge, or they will somehow do a smear campaign and come after you. So those are the things to look out for. That being said, never call your ex a narcissist. That is not going to go well. That is something that will increase the conflict and also make you more scared of them, right? So if we cannot demonize them, see them as a person, then we can manage them better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Monica. I think what the people who are listening need to know are probably for themselves or friends or family who may be dealing with someone they believe is a narcissist. And this is for your own benefit to know whether your ex is one of them. And if you already know, that's a great point. Don't tell them that, but this is to give you some tools to manage your relationship with them and how you can co-parent as seamlessly as possible. So one of the things that our viewers probably want to know are what are some common problems that can arise when co-parenting with a narcissist. So go ahead, Monica, and then I'll chime in with some of the things I've seen.
Yeah, and I would love to hear what you've seen because that also gives me examples to go off of. But things you might encounter are if they don't get their way, they will lash out and try and intimidate you, try and force you in a maybe a verbally aggressive way, in a revenge way, to get you to back down, to get you to do what they want you to do, right? And so that could be you're trying to sell the house and it's not going their way. And so then they start blaming you. They start trying to say this is your fault. Everything will be your fault, period, right? They will not be responsible for anything. They might do a smear campaign, call your employer, tell your friends and family how awful you are. They might play victim. And of course, there's real victims, right? I'm not talking about people who have been abused or victimized. I'm talking about someone who is the abuser playing the victim to pull you in. So, for example, they may be there financially abusing you through the court system. And then they will cry in court and say how you've taken all their money, how awful you've been to them. So this is just how they're projecting and turning it around on you. What have you seen, Lisa?
Mm-hmm. So what I've seen, and especially in the context of parenting disputes, is bullying and name calling, power and control, making the other parent feel very bad. Oftentimes the bullying and name calling is done in the presence of the children, and we're going to talk about some techniques for how to handle these things. I've seen just complete lack of regard for the other parent's parental rights, trying to ice them out. A new paramour comes in and they think they decided that they've moved on and have absolutely no regard for the other parent's rights to see the children, talk to the children, towing the line on following court orders. So they do the absolute bare minimum and they do what they think they can get away with. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we're going to talk about is how to make sure the court order is as enforceable as possible when you're dealing with someone like this. Basically just utter disregard for the other parent's rights and feelings and completely self-absorbed with their goals, which not sometimes and are not aligned with the best interests of the children.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's just it. There's all these different games they play, all these ways they try to get back at you. And really what it's about is control, right? So understanding what their motivation is very powerful because, again, we don't want to call everyone a narcissist. We don't want to demonize them because then they're scary and then we're scared around them and then they have too much power, which is exactly what they want. So what are they motivated by? Is it power? Is it sex? Is it money? Right? There's always a control element. So understanding their motivation helps you play the game of chess. And that's exactly what you need to do with a narcissist. Fly under the radar. Stay off social media. Don't let them know how happy you are. That's for sure. They'll try and destroy that. Don't let them know if you're dating someone unless they need to know because of the kids. Don't let them know any promotions you have. Just keep all your personal information to yourself. And then you're going to observe them like they observe you. So when you were married, they were constantly watching you. What makes you tick? What makes you sad? What makes you angry? What makes you feel powerless? And they will always use that. Oh, so you feel sad when, I get the kids an extra day. So I'm going to try and get the kids an extra day as much as possible. You want this, so I'm not going to give it to you. And so it's just a constant game. And the calmer you are, the less afraid you are of them, the better, because then you can strategize. So, yeah. Go ahead, Lisa.
And so one of the things you and I talked about, Monica, and what I try to advise my clients is to keep all your interactions as much as you can in writing. So text and email. and be very
Yeah.
factual. Don't get into an emotional discussion. Only say what you really need to say. Like, the kids are done basketball at 3:30 p.m. I'm picking them up and I will drop them off, at your house at 9 a.m. Period. End of story. Don't include anything else that you don't need to say. And one of the things that you and I talked about, Monica, is the BIFF,
Hmm.
which I think is a great simple model for people to keep in mind. Do you want to explain that?
Sure. So BIF was created by Bill Eddy of the High Conflict Institute. It's brief, informative, friendly, and formal. So,
Firm.
for example, they lash out at you. You don't need to answer that. You only answer to Lisa's point. What the facts? Okay, okay. You're dropping the kids off at 3. Thank you. Great. I'll see you at 3. Right. If they start calling you names, leave it. Don't answer anything that's slanderish, lashing out, anything that triggers you, right? Because that's what they do. They've been watching you. I'm going to make you have a reaction. Don't react. Yeah.
100% agree. And I see a lot of communications between parties on, the email apps that a lot of my clients use. It's called Our Family Wizard or Talking Parent. I see insults being hurled
Mm-hmm.
towards them, or, because they know that a guardian ad litem may be reviewing this. So they think they're going to catch them in this, and they're going to get this smoking gun, like, oh, you just want this. And they think it's going to win their case. And if they start saying a bunch of nonsense or insulting you or your family members, grandparents, etc., just do not engage. You can just say, this isn't productive and I'm not responding, or just ignore it and just say, okay, so this week, you know, I'll see you at such and such time because the kids are off school today. And, or this is, Martin Luther King weekend. So this is our schedule, period, done. Do not engage with them.
Exactly. That's right.
So Monica, what kinds of I'm curious to hear what you would suggest that a party do. And again, maybe it is the BIFF again, but if there's an in-person interaction, where the kids are in the car, for example, and they're trying to engage in an argument and they're, being insulting and trying to corner you, what would you say to them?
That's so tricky because how dangerous are they? Because narcissism is on a spectrum. Some they might just lash out and they're not going to physically harm you. If they have, what you'll notice when you're married is that the aggression will escalate. And so it might start off with a little bit of slander and get more and more aggressive verbally to emotional abuse to physical abuse. If there's been physical abuse, I would not recommend a handoff, right? Maybe you need to get a parental coordinator. I know one person who they do a handoff at the sheriff's office. So this actually, Lisa, maybe you can even speak to some of that. But if it's just they're going to yell at you, obviously you don't want the kids to see that, but you cannot control them. Never yell back because that's just going to escalate. You can say, okay, and then leave, right? Here are the kids. I'll see you later.
Mm-hmm.
Just act like you're watching a toddler who didn't get their ice cream. You're not going to yell at the toddler. You're not going to threaten the toddler. You're just going to say something like, okay, you can have your ice cream after dinner, like we said, right? Crying doesn't make it happen. So you don't say that to the high conflict person. You just say, okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye now. Just imagine they're a toddler because that's what they're acting like a lot of the time.
I think that is a great analogy, Monica. And I think also it takes some of the fear away from the person who is potentially has a fear of this co-parent.
Yeah.
And so you think of them as they've got some inner need that isn't being met. And in some ways they are acting like a child and it's just manifesting in these scary, controlling ways.
Yeah.
So one of the things you did mention was a parenting coordinator. I'll talk a little about legalities. So when you've got kids involved, There are a couple ways to address things that are going on with children that are harmful, that may be caused by this person. So there's obviously therapy. There's nothing shameful about your child being in therapy. It's always kid appropriate. It's friendly for little kids. They do floor time play therapy. There are guardian ad litems if you're in litigation. Now, my philosophy is always, always try to settle out of court or use some sort of out of court process before you go into litigation. I've litigated many cases, and it should always be your last resort. And sometimes it truly is the only way when you've got a person that is just blatantly disregarding court orders. There are remedies for that. There's contempt. There is a statute in Illinois for visitation interference, and there are some really strict penalties. I think the downside of that is it's a long and expensive process. So you always try to resolve things outside of court whenever possible. And so one of the tools for that is a parenting coordinator. A parenting coordinator is a third party whose task is to settle and manage disputes that arise. The parenting coordinator does not have the authority to change your parenting schedule or to change the decision-making allocation, but what they can do is they have the authority to make a binding decision about the smaller disputes. For example, if your judgment says that you get the kids after school on Halloween and your ex says, and school ends at 3, or they get off the bus at 3 and your ex says, you're not picking them up till 4, that is something a parenting coordinator can easily just say, no, the judgment says after 3 or after school ends at 3, that is the time it will start. So they will resolve those small ambiguities without revamping your agreement. And that is super efficient, rather than you calling your lawyer, them calling their lawyer, the lawyers coordinating a time to talk, somebody filing a motion. This is just the one person who actually has the legal authority to make that decision for you. And then if that person doesn't comply with this binding decision that Halloween time starts at 3 p.m. after school, then that will go back to the judge eventually. But at least you've got this one person who has the authority to do that. And a pattern over repeated patterns of those things happening over time will get you some relief in the long run.
Yeah, that's a good point, because of course, to your point, it's better for the kids to stay out of court. But when you have someone really high on the narcissistic spectrum, it's hard to stay out of court, right? Have you had that? Have you seen the same thing?
Absolutely. I've seen it many times, and it's a tough one because, the court system isn't perfect. It wasn't designed to deal with family disputes. I mean, if you're on trial, the rules of evidence are you can only testify to what you saw, heard, taste, touch, and smell. And again, what your kid told you is hearsay. And so then when you try to say your opinion, it's going to draw an objection. So you're very limited in what you can say on your testimony on the stand. And so, you're going to spend thousands of dollars going to trial and feel like you didn't even get to say what you wanted to say. So it is always better to avail yourself of these other options. And there are even more options that we didn't discuss. So you've got a guardian ad litem who can interview the children and report to the court what they believe is best for the children. And more likely than not, the court's going to do what the guardian ad litem says. Not always. If you show that their reasoning is faulty for whatever reason. There's a child representative, there's an attorney for the child, the attorney for the child, their client is actually the child. So that's for older children. There's a custody evaluation where a mental health professional, a clinical psychologist, will come in and do a very in-depth investigation. They'll interview parties, they'll do psychological testing, they'll write a 20, 30 page long report with very detailed recommendations. And so that's obviously an expensive endeavor, but it is also can be very effective rather than two parties on the witness stand, he said, she said, and not even be able to fully tell their story because you're bound by the rules of evidence. So there's a lot of options there. There's co-parenting therapy. But again, I mean, if you've got a case where you've got one violation after the other, and this person isn't cooperating, I think you have to file your petition for contempt for visitation interference. You get what you can out of that, and then you go to the parenting coordinator, because the parenting coordinator, the petition for contempt is sort of your one time, you know, let's try this out and see if it corrects the behavior. And if the behavior continues, then your parenting coordinator deals with that. And eventually, if that person is truly not acting in the best interest of their child, you may have a case for a change in parenting time. I mean, if you're dealing with young children and you've got, 15 plus years of this ahead of you, you're going to need some sort of solution rather than just filing motions in court.
Yeah, so you bring up a lot of very good points. Yeah, I've written some of those custody evaluations, and even when you write a custody evaluation, the judge will look at it, but again, it doesn't mean the narcissist always follows suit, right? And then they tend to go after the evaluator, which is, I've seen people that have come after me verbally before. So you're right, though. These are all good ways to protect yourself. And this is when it's important to know who you're dealing with as an ex. How dangerous are they? How much harm are they causing? Because ideally, we want the children to have a relationship with both parents. But if you send your child to a home where they're being verbally, emotionally abused, very hard to show in court. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, obviously, you have more protection, right? Would you agree with that, Lisa? Or have you seen ways that people are able to protect themselves from verbal and emotional abuse?
Yeah, so orders of protection are absolutely effective for physical abuse. I do civil orders of protection, so there can be a stay away order, and the children can be named as protected parties. Those are in place for a maximum of 2 years. So there would need to be something put in place after that for protections. And there's always criminal, orders of protection as well. For verbal and emotional abuse, that one's a little bit trickier, because in order to get a civil order of protection, you must show that you are fearful of this person. So insults do not necessarily, don't rise to the level of this person is dangerous and you're fearful of them. They may be hurting your feelings, and it's a completely unacceptable behavior as a parent. I don't think an order of protection is the remedy for that. I think we look at, how is this behavior affecting the children? And then put remedies in place that protect the children from witnessing verbal and emotional abuse, because that could be considered enough to rise to the level of an order of protection in some cases. And also to give you techniques to deal with this person, protect your mental health and your kids' mental health, but somehow coexist in a manner that's not going to just completely, make you feel dead inside every day for dealing with this person.
Yeah.
And I want to circle back to some of we kind of glossed over in the beginning stages of how does this person make you feel, and I want to make sure that we address those. So one of the terms that gets thrown around a lot is gaslighting, and I want to make sure everyone understands that term. So Monica, can you explain what that means, and how does a narcissist use that, and what's the effect on the other person?
This is a hard one because, the term gaslight comes from that movie Gaslight from the 50s, where the husband basically made the woman feel crazy. She would be like, I swear the clock was just there, and he'd move it and be like, no, you're crazy, it's over here. So they'll call you crazy, you're overreacting, you're too sensitive. That's not what happened. So for example, your narcissistic ex will be shouting at the children, and you'll say, please don't shout at the children. And they'll say, what are you talking about? I didn't shout at the children. You're crazy. You're the problem. It's always you're the problem. You're crazy. And it could be someone who has high empathy, who has low self-worth, who starts to believe it. Oh, I am the problem. If you're someone who grew up with abuse or neglect, I don't want to say you're easier to be gaslit, but because maybe you never had a voice, you were never heard, the gaslighting is very effective. And sometimes those are the people the narcissist wants to hook up with, marry. Because again, narcissism is about control. If I have control, I feel safe in the world. So basically, you know for a fact this happened. And they're going to say, no, that's not what happened. It's this. So then people start to question their own reality. Am I wrong? Am I crazy? Am I too sensitive? Am I the problem? Yeah, so that's something to be very, very cautious of.
And so I hear the theme of control. Why does a narcissist want control, and how did they become, were they born like this, or how did they become a narcissist that needs to control another person?
So there's a lot of different ways, right? One is you just genetically, narcissists or cluster B personality types, their frontal lobe works differently. And so let's say your father or your mother was a narcissist or a cluster B personality disorder. That doesn't mean that the kid is going to be cluster B if the environment is warm and nurturing. But you take even any child without that frontal lobe, genetic frontal lobe, and you put them somewhere where you're so special and you're so admirable, but only when you do what I want you to do. So for example, I saw this a lot in Hong Kong, where it's like a very wealthy family. They might be in the media. Their child is the most special person in the world, but only when they get A's, only when they look good, only when they're not embarrassing the parents. And so the love is very conditional. That's one way. Another way could just be, again, that genetic component plus the environment, or severe neglect, right? I've been severely neglected, so now I have to fight for power. I have to fight for control. That being said, this doesn't mean you're going to be a narcissist. I don't want to overgeneralize, right? Because a lot of people have had childhood trauma and they're fine. They have empathy. So yeah, it's kind of an environment of conditional love. You are special only when I say you're special, things like that.
And so it sounds like, from what I'm understanding, is that this makes this person feel so inadequate that they need to fill that void in their future relationships with other people.
Yeah, it's very shame-based. So I'll use myself an example. Imagine I have so much shame and I don't want to take any responsibility for my actions, because if I say you're right, I've been awful to you, I'm not going to be able to regulate my emotions around that, because that means I'm unlovable, I'm worthless, I'm not special, I'm nothing. So if I'm feeling inadequate, I'm not going to admit that. I'm going to say, you're inadequate, you're crazy, right? You're the problem.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we had discussed a while ago as a technique to deal with them, which kind of made me laugh, but could actually be useful, and I'm wondering if you can explain to those that are listening, is that you need to stroke their ego. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? And in dealing with a narcissist, one of the techniques is to stroke their ego.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, they're always watching you. What hurts you, what makes you happy, and you start observing them and you start seeing their patterns. Okay, this makes them mad, this makes them happy, this calms them down. So for example, I know the narcissist in my life is motivated by money. So I might be like, say something complimentary about their financial status or their status or who they're dating or what, you look really nice today. Where did you buy that outfit? That's easy, but it should be sincere, because they will pick up on it. And so it could be like, oh, nice shoes, or thank you for taking the kids to their birthday party. They said they had so much fun. So then they hear, oh, I am an adequate parent, not an inadequate parent, right? Because as soon as they feel rejected or inadequate, that's when the conflict starts. And it could be something simple, like, hey, what time did the kids eat dinner last night? they hear, oh, you don't think I'm responsible. You don't think I fed the kids on time. So there goes the rage, right? And so it's like walking on eggshells. But once you understand their patterns, you know what to compliment them on, how to question them in a way that makes them feel adequate and not inadequate. Yeah. But also understanding how they get you. So, and you have noticed in your body. So just using myself an example, not that I have a narcissistic in my life. Well, I think we all do, but
I think we've all at least met one or worked for one
yeah,
at some point.
definitely. The
If
bully,
you
right?
haven't, then you're very lucky.
Yes. So I'm just imagining I have a narcissistic ex. And I know every time there's handover, I feel very triggered in my body because they're going to say something mean, like, oh, you look like you gained weight, because they know maybe I have a body image issue. And so I'll notice in my body where I feel that hook, right? That insult is a hook they've used on me that they know they can get me with. Oh, I feel the hook in my chest. Okay. Imagine taking that hook out. This is helpful to take away their power. And then you also know they're going to insult me. But that insult, you can't get that hook in anymore because I see it. I watch it. I know who you are. I can see you. I know what you're trying to do. And so you'll notice when you interact with them, you have body sensations. Pay a lot of attention to that and call it a hook or a plug or something, their teeth, whatever imagery you like. That's where they have you. This is their power. If you can imagine taking that out, it can't get in, it helps. Then you can interact with them calmly, in a way that's empowering and not scary or fearful or angry.
It sounds like that a person dealing with a narcissist in a family dynamic, co-parenting, or some sort of, pre-divorce, post-divorce, it seems like you just need to completely emotionally detach yourself from that person and be completely logical in the way you respond and react to them. No emotion whatsoever.
Yes, very true, which is easier said than done because they've caused you so much harm. And this harm has been on purpose. Some say it's unconscious, maybe it is, but I think they know exactly how to harm people. And so if you're struggling to observe and not judge, be logical without emotion, get help. Get help, get help, get help. Because every emotional reaction will be used against you. Absolutely.
I think that is one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation that I would give to people. If you remember one thing, it's don't try to manage this on your own.
Yeah.
You need your attorney, of course, to deal with
Yeah.
the legal aspects, but you must have your own mental health professional that is looking out for your mental and emotional well-being. And maybe your friends and family are trying to help you, but you need somebody who is an expert in this field to help you through this, because this is no easy task and nobody should ever try and do this on their own.
Yeah, that's a good point. You absolutely need an attorney. Absolutely. 100%. And then sometimes friends and family mean well, but they add to the demonizing, right? They add to the fear, they add to the anger. So be careful of that one. But yes, a support network is very important.
Yeah, I've experienced that a lot. And I think that sometimes, when step parents are in the picture and, grandparents and just anyone who's peripherally part of the family, they mean well, and sometimes they unknowingly make it worse. So if you are getting advice from a family member, a step parent, a grandparent, make sure you run that by your mental health professional, because you need somebody who really knows what they're doing. We're talking about your children's lives ultimately and their well-being. And I think those of you that are parents all want the best for your kids, and you want to handle this the right way, because children are fragile, and they're watching everything mom and dad do, and they need to feel secure, in their relationships as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So On that note, also, when you're scared or angry, your nervous system is wired up here. And you might even go into a survival mode, which for sure you can't think through. So decompress every day, take time out for yourself, try to bring your whole nervous system down, whatever works for you.
Mm-hmm. And so, Monica, you mentioned that you used to write those custody evaluations. I'm curious, did you ever find that somebody in your psychological testing process is a narcissist? And how did you incorporate recommendations that you thought could help diffuse some of this conflict?
Almost always, if you have a custody evaluation, one or two people are high conflict, right? Because they can't work it out themselves. And the judge is lost. They're just like, oh, this has been in court for a year, 2 years, millions of dollars. Well, this is Hong Kong, right? So a million Hong Kong dollars is about 100,000. And so by the time it gets to a custody evaluation, for sure there's a personality disorder. So I do the same thing I'm recommending all of you to do, is to talk to them in a way that's not demonizing. They're a human. Don't make them feel inadequate. Empathize with their feelings. That doesn't mean you have to agree. You can say, like, I know this is hard for you. I might say things like, this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. This is what the judge is probably seeing, so they're aware. This is what we need to work toward, right? So it's usually supervised access, which of course makes people really angry. Care and control, I would usually recommend to the stable person. And when I say stable, that's the person who can regulate their own emotions, create a secure environment. Sometimes, the cluster B, the narcissists, they cope through alcohol, drugs. That's not safe. There's neglect, which you have to report. You can talk about emotional and verbal abuse, whether the judge cares or not. So yeah, usually it goes by the supervised access route. And then I try and recommend how they can get out of that supervised access route. What do they need to change? What do they need to do? Which is usually when they get upset, right? Because it's not my fault, it's their fault. How could you be so blind? How could you not see it? But there's ways to de-escalate that, right? By validating, I know this is hard on you. That would be hard for me too. But I hope you understand this is what the evidence is. This is what the judge is seeing. I'm trying to help you out here. I'm trying to give you a route to get out of this issue, right? And so that's ways to de-escalate. And so you can talk like that with them too. Always empathize. Let's say they're angry, they're raging, and you say, I know this is hard for you. Maybe they'll calm down.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, why are you so angry? They're like, I'm not angry. I'm not raging. So yeah, empathize, like, okay, I understand this is challenging. Tell me more. Tell me more is a good one. Tell me more. Okay, what do you need? Not saying you're going to give them what they need if it's ridiculous. What can I do to help? Are you okay? Those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. And along those lines, I think, those are the communication tips, which are good. And then if your case doesn't rise to the level of supervised visitation, which I think is an extreme remedy anywhere. I know in the state of Illinois, you have to prove a serious endangerment, which is a very high burden of proof in order to get a parent to be supervised. So let's say, what if the custodial parent is a narcissist and somehow the agreement got entered where they're the one mainly with the children? How do you make sure you're protected legally? Well, if you're in the drafting stages of your parenting agreement, you want to make sure your provisions are specific and crystal clear. You don't want a situation where the example of Halloween parenting time starts at the end of school. Instead of saying when school ends, just say 3 p.m. So there's no way they can finagle around that. In terms of access to information and records for the kids, as an example, if the non-custodial parent is getting iced out of, let's say, doctor appointments or specialist appointments or information about school events, the agreement needs to be carefully drafted to say, all information regarding the medical provider shall be circulated to father, because usually it's the mother who's handling that, not to be, sometimes it's reversed. So, and you're very specific about saying that that person has access to records. Same with school. The custodial parent shall authorize the access of the other parent to contact the school directly and get information and subscribe to email lists, et cetera, et cetera. And most schools and medical providers have dealt with this before, and daycare providers, that they know that there are some families that are living in separate households, and they have ways to accommodate both parents getting access to information. It's really important to have a very tightly drafted agreement, because the way these people who are in control that maybe narcissists work is that they're going to toe the line and they're going to do whatever they can to get away with it. And as an attorney, it is impossible to prove a contempt case a violation of a court order unless you can show a very clear violation. So the more detailed and specific your agreement is, the easier it is to enforce. So if your agreement is already in place, I think if you ever are in court to modify it, those are the things you want to put in place when you're ready to modify it. And maybe if you're, if you've exhausted all efforts out of court to resolve it, maybe then once you establish your pattern with your parenting coordinator, they can then recommend that the agreement be modified to correct X, Y, and Z, to make it more crystal clear, so that we don't all end up back in court spending thousands and thousands of dollars on lawyers arguing over the start time for a holiday parenting time. The courts are completely backlogged, especially in Cook County, Illinois. Maybe not so much in the collar counties, but these judges don't have time to get into the details of each and every parenting dispute. There just simply aren't enough resources. And so I think that anyone that goes to court, especially in Cook County, needs to be aware that it's very time consuming, and because of the time consuming nature of court, it's going to be expensive. And so you got to do everything you can to keep it out of court, which also benefits both parties, because you maintain control over the outcome when you're in an out of court process. Mediation, collaborative law, the parenting coordinator, all those avenues.
And it's really hard on the kids when you're in court.
Mm-hmm.
They see the conflict, they hear about it, they feel the tension in the home, they feel the stress, and then they wonder why don't my parents love each other? Why can't they get along? Why am I in the middle of this? Yeah.
And one thing we haven't talked about, Monica, and I'm curious if you've seen it, is what if the narcissist has influenced the kids, and the kids are now aligning with that parent? And what does that look like, and how do you address that?
That is so complicated, and for sure you want to work with professionals on that. So that's parental alienation, which is very controversial. And the judge, it confuses the judge, because they're like, okay, you're claiming parental alienation, but is it real, or are you the abusive person? So people who alienate children are usually narcissists or some kind of abuser. And what it is trying to tell them all the awful things about you, all the awful things you've done, how awful your family is, why they shouldn't even like your ethnicity, your religion. Those are extreme cases. And, sometimes the person claiming alienation is actually the abuser, and that's why it's complicated. So let's say you are like, I'm putting in for a domestic violence restraining order, and this person says, I'm not violent, you're alienating, right? And so it's very complicated. But if your kids have been alienated against you, you also have to walk a very fine line. It's like you have been made to be a demon, and your child is actually scared of you now. So you have to, if it's really severe and they won't even come to your house, you need help. But when they finally do come to your house, you need to have low contact activities, meaning you go play a game, you go to the park, you don't sit down and look them in the eye and have a discussion about what happened. Because all that shame the narcissist has is now in the child. So now your child is ashamed. What if my parent I rejected hates me now? I've been bad. I should feel guilty. What if they don't like me? It's going to feel awkward with them. So in the beginning, you have to make it fun, light, no serious conversations. Do not alienate back. Do not turn your child against the other parent in, to make up for it. It doesn't work. But I would say get help. That's not an easy case, and that's heartbreaking to be the rejected parent.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, especially just the fact that it's so complicated. When you've got parental alienation. And I want to be clear that a lot of times the word gets used and it's not really parental alienation. So make sure before you start, saying that somebody is alienating, make sure you fully understand what it means, because it's a very complex phenomenon. But when you do see it, I think it's just a really sensitive situation with the kids. And my advice to a person who is on the receiving end of that and your kids are somehow turned against you, my advice would be don't give up, but also be patient, because especially when you've got older children who are, in their teenage years, you only have a few years left until they're 18. And in the state of Illinois, when a child turns 18, they don't have to see you any longer. It's up to them. So if you want to save that relationship with your child, in my experience, the more you push with a teenager who doesn't want to see you, sometimes that backfires. And what I've seen is pushing in litigation, which backfires. So you want to be careful about your approach. And I think doing it on your teenage child's terms is the key. And if that means you're only going to have lunch with them once a week for some time, I think you have to do it on their terms for a little bit. To make them feel that they are heard. And again, that's not a cookie cutter solution to every case where there's parental alienation, but I think the message is be very mindful that your teenage child wants to be heard, and you may have to take a step back and do it on their terms and not take an aggressive litigation approach.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, because the more you push, the scarier you become. So, we talked about the narcissist, don't make them feel rejected, don't make them feel inadequate. With the child or the teenager, don't make them feel guilty. And it's little things that you wouldn't think would make them feel guilty, like saying, I love you so much, I miss you so much. Then they're like, oh, I've been a bad child. And it just escalates that shame and makes them pull back. So it's almost like just be very friendly with them, which is hard because you miss your child, right? It's really hard to do. But you're right, you can't push too hard. It has the opposite effect.
And you absolutely cannot denigrate the other parent, because no matter how wrong that other parent might be, and no matter how much they twisted it around, bad mouthing them to your child is not going to help.
No, it's going to make it a lot worse, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, do we have any questions? I didn't see any come in. Does anyone have any further questions? Or Lisa, do you have any further questions or things to talk about?
I don't think so. I think that, like what we had talked about, the big takeaways: don't try to do this alone. Have your team of professionals with you. And one thing we didn't talk about, I think, is if there is financial abuse. I know you touched on that, Monica. You may need your financial professional with you. Like, for example, maybe you are a woman who is a homemaker for 25, 30 years, and you had no access to the financials because your partner was extremely controlling. Have your financial advisor help you and put them in touch with your lawyer, to make sure that you're fully informed and you can take back control of your life, because it can be scary if you've just been in this situation for so long. You may feel like a deer in the headlights and you don't know how to start regaining control. This is not just exclusive to your family law attorney and your therapist. It may include a multitude of different professionals. So just make sure you get yourself informed, and don't try to do it alone, I think, is the big message. Do you have any big takeaways, Monica?
No, I totally agree with you 100%. You need a team, because they spend their whole life, their whole day thinking, scheming how to get at you, right? So yes, and most people do not think like that. Um, yeah, so just make sure you take care of yourself. You practice self-compassion because they're going to tear you down. Understand who you are, understand your worth so they can't get at you. And just, yeah, get your team and practice a lot of self-compassion. Stay safe for sure.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Monica. I really enjoyed hearing your feedback, and I hope that some of the people listening also, found some value in it. And anyone is more than welcome to contact us if you have follow-up questions. We're happy to, answer those for you.
Yeah, thank you too, Lisa. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Monica. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.